Greetings, everyone. I'm Julie Bogart, and it's great to have you here today for our first of 3 webinars. Please come right in. All right, let me share my screen, and we're going to get started. So first of all, welcome. Welcome home. Welcome home. A lot of times when you hear the words homeschool, our minds kind of go to the school and we kind of skip over the word home. I remember when Noah was like 5 years old, kindergarten age, we had just started homeschooling, and I had to go to the pediatrician. And the pediatrician in 1991 said to Noah, "Oh, you're lucky you got out of kindergarten for the day." And Noah said back, "What's kindergarten?" And I said, "Oh, sorry, doctor. My son is homeschooled. He doesn't know what kindergarten is." And the pediatrician said, "What's homeschool?" Okay, in 1991, nobody knew what it was. People were still hearing about it for the first time. That means when I was homeschooling as a brand new educator, I didn't have to compete with anybody else's weird notions. There was not a stereotype that was being played out on movies, in television, on late night jokes on late night TV. I was creating the definition as we went along. And when people would ask me, "What's homeschooling?" or "Why do you do it?" I'd say, "It's a chance to tailor make an education with my kids. I get a front row seat to the moment they learn to read, to the time they suddenly click and fall in love with history or want to know more about science." I wanted to be the active ingredient in my kids' educational lives. And back then, when no one knew what homeschooling was, they were enticed by that description. Fast forward 40 years, right? Almost 40. And you've got a whole different scenario that you're facing today. One is we went from fewer than 1 million families to almost 4 million families in that time period. Secondly, these families that represent homeschooling are not the pioneers. They're not the earliest adopters. In fact, there are whole generations of kids who were homeschooled who have a lot to say about it. And there are today educators, entertainers, people in the sciences, college level professors, journalists who have opinions about homeschooling. Today's homeschooler is not only coming into a more well-known practice, but they're also coming into a more well-established definition. And that can really create a different kind of intimidation. So we're going to talk about that today. You know, when I first started, the big question is it legal? Are we doing it well enough? Today's question is, am I damaging my child? Am I ruining their opportunities? These are the kinds of things that I hear from today's homeschool curious parents. So before we can do any of this, we have to take a quiz. All right? And I'm going to ask you to tell me which of these pictures is a home, B or A? Is A a home or is B a home? Just put it in the chat. What have you got? Wow, you guys are good students. You can really tell what a home looks like. By the way, I am in that window over the garage. That's my house. So you can picture me right now. Okay? That's a home. Very good. 100%. All right, now I'm going to ask you, which one of these is a school, A or B? I'm curious to see what you say. A and B, A, B, both, A and B, A and B, both. Okay, did anyone simply say A? Yes, some of you said A. That is the right answer. Now, I know you thought I was being tricky, but I want us to start on the right foot. A is a school. It literally says Lakota West High School on that tower. This is the school that some of my kids went to when they decided to do public high school. I want to say emphatically, with love in my heart, that B is never a school. Even though we put the words homeschool together, the conditions of these two buildings are so different that if you try to think about importing school into the home, you will immediately undermine the learning that can happen in that building. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the properties of school and compare them to the properties of home. You ready? All right, the properties of school. First of all, there's a bell schedule. Even if you're just talking elementary school, there is still a time for learning, a time for recess, a time for lunch. Sometimes there's a time for music and art. It follows a certain sequence. And by high school and junior high, you're literally deep into English. Let's say you're really enjoying the class. When the bell rings, you are required to disengage and go to math. You don't have the option of saying, you know what, I'm really enjoying what I'm learning right now. I want to keep going. That doesn't exist in school. The teacher is in charge. You know how we know? Because the teacher is usually standing. They're up, the students are down. The teacher decides what happens in the room, even if the teacher decides that the kids decide. Tricky, right? The teacher is still making that decision. Most schools still use stiff desks and chairs, even in the classrooms that have a nice soft couch or a cozy chair to read in. You have to have permission to use those. You can't just get up, walk around, try out several seats. Very distracting. So the furniture is organized and orchestrated by the teacher or the environment that you're in. Learning and breaks are allocated. So you might be doing a test and then you take a break. You don't get to say, I want the break first. All behavior is controlled. You can't chew gum. Now they're saying whether or not you can have your cell phone. You can't just stand up and leave the classroom. You've got to stay in the room. You need permission to do things that don't follow the order of that classroom. The academic assessment is by the instructor. There are very, very few settings where the instructor says, tell me what you thought of what you did. Do you feel you grew? Do you feel you improved? What were your goals for this assignment? In the schools where that's happening, it's rare. It is not common. Evaluation is almost always of finished products. In other words, you're given an assignment, you work on it at home or in class, but what the teacher looks at is that last iteration. So you might have worked hard, you might not have worked hard at all. That does not factor in to your grade. And finally, you need a hall pass to pee. You can't just get up and leave, right? You have to get permission. And by the way, if you're a teenage girl, that can be an awkward moment at certain times of the month. All right, so we know what school is. Let's talk about what home is and why I said that the home is never a school. Even if we learn at home, it's never a school. First of all, there's no schedule. Now, I know some of you are going to say to me, we have a schedule, Julie. We start homeschool at 9 in the morning, and then at 10 we shift, right? And you've got this, this plan, this idea in your head. But here's what your kids know, and here's what I know. If you're in the middle of the math lesson with one of your kids, and you get a text message from your spouse saying, hey, honey, I overdrew the checking account. Can you move some money from the savings to the checking so the check doesn't bounce or the payment doesn't bounce? You're going to stop that math lesson. You're going to actually just abort the whole lesson, move to the phone or the computer, and you're going to make that change, right? If you're in the middle of reading aloud and the toddler needs a drink or needs a diaper change, you're going to do it. Your kids know that the schedule that you set up isn't real. It's sort of a framework, a routine, a thing you follow. It's aspirational. At school, not aspirational. You do not see teachers in the middle of a class taking a text message, hopping on their computer to move money around. So we have to acknowledge that when we create a schedule at home, everybody knows it's fake. You can get some buy-in, but because we know it's fake, it does not have the same power that a school schedule has. We also know that when we come home from being away, we just want to be ourselves. We don't want anyone to bug us. We don't want to have to perform. We don't have to use a certain set of language prompts to prove that we're being polite. We're just like hanging out. We aren't putting on kind of a student uniform of personality. We want to be comfortable. We kick off our shoes. I take off my bra. You might do something else. Kids will want to cozy up in the corner of a couch and do their copy work there instead of at the kitchen table. Sometimes at home, we have the freedom to attend to a personal need. You know, we're in a bad mood. We just want to go in the other room for a moment, or we want to just veg out and watch a TV show instead of doing math because we're tired from staying up too late playing games with the family. We can take care of ourselves at home because home is built for the care of human beings. You can eat and pee whenever you want. You don't need permission. All of the home education that happens at home includes observation. We don't need to give grades. We're at home. We know if the kid put all their energy in or not. I have an inside joke with homeschool parents that their students have never missed a math problem. Do you want to know why? Because if a child gets a math problem wrong, the mom, frequently the mother, will look over the shoulder and say, let's rework that. That doesn't happen in school. You just get -3. There is a feeling at home of the whole process mattering, not just the outcome. And you aren't left to figure out where you went wrong or where you fell short on your own, because the process is more interesting than the final product. In fact, I like to share sometimes in the writing context of writing that honestly, sometimes I don't even have my kids do a finished copy of a writing product. You know, they might have an assignment and we get all the way through 2 drafts and they're done. They've learned everything they can learn from it. So we don't copy it over, we don't type it up, we don't make a final version. We move on and save that for another experience of writing. This is the flexibility of a home educator. But let me just tell you, I had a fantasy when I first started homeschooling, and I bet some of you have the same one. I pictured a child of mine trotting down the stairs, motivated to learn. They were going to hop into the beanbag chair near a sunny window, grab their little math wrap that works on times tables, and they're going to sit there happily smiling, learning math without me even telling them to. How many of you have had this sort of like homeschool, unschool fantasy where you're like, oh, if my child really loved learning, they would just do math, right? And if I just like make sure it's sunny outside, they'll be more likely to do it. If I get the right beanbag chair. Yeah, a lot of you know what I'm talking about. The other fantasy is a student who shows up at the table, is willing to sit and crank through 6 workbooks that you've laid out carefully with the right number of problems without complaint. How many people think that is the fantasy of homeschooling? Well, I got the right books. I put them in the right order. Yeah, exactly. In both scenarios, we are imagining that our children will cooperate with our vision of what learning looks like. You are imagining that children will cooperate with the vision you have that dances like fairy plums in your hair, in your head. Is it plum fairies? I don't know. Okay, let's keep going. So let's declutter this fantasy. First of all, we all know that schooling is not 100% reliable. Let me just be clear. Oh, yeah, sugar plums. Thank you. This is unscripted. So, you know, we're just digging around in the brain for all the references. Yes. Okay, so imagine this. We know schooling isn't reliable. You know how I know? I got all the way to age 34 without understanding that multiplication was a shortcut for adding. I had a degree from UCLA and I had never made that connection. I still remember using these things called Cuisenaire rods with my oldest son and thinking, why didn't someone just do this with me and show me the multiple nature of these numbers? I thought it was pure memorization. Even with skip counting, I didn't quite get it. Schooling presents information, and even smart students like me who got A's could master the structure, but it did not necessarily mean understanding. Schooling is fine, not reliable, and unschooling is not magical. Your kids do not automatically learn trigonometry because they were good at Lego. There are instructional components to learning. The real goal that we all have, whether you're teaching in a school or homeschooling, is that you're imparting to your kids a love of learning. But let me be clear, the words a love of learning means something to you that they don't mean to your child. So let's start here. One of my favorite authors that I used to read, Thomas More, wrote a book called The Reenchantment of Everyday Life. And he really advocates for this vision of what it means for a child to learn. Imagine a form of education that does not try to change the child or transform it into an adult, but rather provides a place where the child can flourish as a child. What does that mean? It means we're not training mini adults. We are suiting the learning experience to the child and how they learn. Here's the conundrum. A home educator will say to me, I want a happy learner. But secretly, what they mean is, I want a cooperative student. Happy in their minds secretly means cooperation with my agenda, because let's be honest, a kid playing a video game, happy learner, doing what they want, learning all kinds of stuff, but we don't value that. We're like, they're a happy learner if they want to learn fractions in a workbook. So happy is not about learning, it's about cooperation. Here's what parents say they want. I want my child to love learning. But what they really mean is, I want my child to love what I teach. And the thing of it is, kids have a different agenda. Here's what they want. They say they want to have fun, which we reject. We're like, fun is not learning. But let me decode the word fun for you. What they really mean is, I want to care. Have you ever watched a kid playing a video game and at the end of it, they're in a bad mood? They start yelling, they punch a hole in the wall. I have a kid who punched a hole in the wall one time. You know why? Because they care. Have you ever been working on, let's say, developing a blog or a website, and a glitch happens and the entire thing goes down and you have to start from scratch? Are you a happy learner? No, but you're a learner. You're going to go back and fix it, but you're going to be angry that the learning you're doing resulted in failure. Caring is what drives learning, not smiles. Caring, investment, motivation, a desire to overcome frustration. There is brain research that confirms this idea by William Rhinesmith, who's an education reformer. He says, real learning connotes use. If something isn't going to be immediately used or applied in some manner, it won't get learned. For me, times tables didn't get learned because I wasn't using or applying them in ways that were meaningful to me. If we want learning to be sticky, and we do, there has to be some relevance to the world your child lives in. We can't just keep saying, you'll need it when you're an adult, or you'll need it in college. For an 8-year-old, that's 10 years away. They haven't even lived 10 years, and we're saying, be interested in the thing that will happen in 10 years. Nope, doesn't work for kids. So I want you to look at these 3 pictures. I want you to pick which one looks like real writing, like a student who is actually learning, okay? Number 1 is the cute kid with the fun pen and the Chuck Taylors and the funny hat in a tire swing. Number 2 is a girl sitting at a table consciously and carefully doing copywork. Number 3 is my miserable daughter. Okay, so which one is it? 1, 2, or 3? It is a trick question. It is all of them. They're all real writing, because let's go backwards. Let's see if I can go backwards. The first one just looks cool. It's how we think of unschooling. It's how we think of self-motivated learning. The second one looks like a traditional student. And if you're worried about traditional school, you might think, are they learning? But look how careful and how seriously she's taking what she's doing. But number 3, my miserable daughter, she's doing the work, but boy, she doesn't want to. What matters is not how the activity looks, but how the activity feels. You will have some kids who love workbooks, and you will have some kids who are miserable doing workbooks. Learning is happening when the child cares, when they're engaged. We are looking for this unique intersection of outcomes. We want our kids to be happy, but we also want them to be qualified for college or an adult life. That is our holy grail. The question then in homeschooling is, how do we get there without looking like a school? And this is where I want to recommend to you that we look for magic doors. Ready? I propose something in my book, The Brave Learner, this one, that I call the continent of learning. And before I show you what it is, let me explain it this way. Every subject under the sun is related to everything else under the sun. For instance, I live in Cincinnati. One of the biggest companies here is Procter and Gamble. Did you know that students who take chemistry as their major and masters and even PhDs work to make Pantene shampoo better? Chemistry is related to shampoo. It's related to Tide. When we're teaching these abstract subjects, sometimes we forget what is that application in the real world. We're like, they got to learn math, but why? Why do they need math? One of my kids, we'll talk about it in a minute, discovered that math was relevant when he wanted to raise money to go to space camp. Sometimes what we're doing is we're so busy with the abstraction of completing schoolwork, we forget to make the thing we're teaching connected to anything they understand. Yes, chemists brew beer and make energy drinks. That's exactly right. Here is an example of what I say shows how one topic is related to everything. So I put piano at the center, but you could also try this with video games, by the way. History. How is history related to piano? Well, history is just the study of the story of whatever thing you're looking at, whether it's politics and war, or it's the history of lighting or technology, the history of musical instruments, the history of art, the history of clothing and fashion. So if you have a child who plays piano, you could use the tools of history to explore the history of the instrument, biographies of composers, the history of various genres of music, the origin of the instrument, maybe the development, how it's used in Western and Eastern cultures. You might look at a timeline and see where piano fits on the timeline of musical instruments. Adjacent to history is always religion and culture. So we could look at Bach and the fugue and Handel's Messiah and the organ versus the piano. We might look at the difference between opera, bar music, and pop rock. There's math in piano, composition, time signatures, transposing, chord structure, number of pedals and keys. We might look at science, vibration, sound, physics. We might look at Beethoven, who's deaf. There is foreign language embedded in piano, the Latin musical notation in opera. And then, of course, musical notation is its own kind of literature, its own kind of reading system. If you look at one subject, you can, at one topic, at one interest, you can do this for every topic. Now, I'm not saying to beat your kids over the head with all of these subjects for all the things they love. What I'm saying is, once you accept that learning is related to what they love, you can now notice. I'll give you an example. We were working on First Nations in Canada with one of my kids, and he was finding the subject matter not that interesting until we suddenly discovered that this one tribe, this one nation we were looking at, created lacrosse. And I have a hard time saying the name of that nation, Haudenosaunee, I think. But when he saw that, he played lacrosse. It was like a can opener. Suddenly, we were interested in all of the aspects of the culture that contributed to this amazing game that we were still playing centuries later. This is what we mean. I did not set out to find the connection. I stayed alert for the connections as they arose. There are other times where I helped a child bridge and make that connection. A continent of learning is a way of reorienting your imagination around what education can be. Rather than repeatedly delivering abstraction, you are going to help that abstraction show up in relevant experiences, and meaningful connections. So here's what I want you to do as a home educator. Here's what you can do. You can first see differently and then stage the home. What do I mean by that? We use 4 ports of entry to learn anything. We use our brains, sort of that cognitive piece, like here's information, I want to know about it. Then we use our hearts, how we connect to something either emotionally or through our port of empathy or through our humanity. We use our bodies, activity like looking through a microscope or doing jumping jacks or learning about something because we built a model of it. And then sometimes we learn through our spirit, meaning our sense of profound connection. Let me show you what I mean. When we are using our minds, kids are expressing curiosity. They're asking questions and they're thinking critically. In other words, when your child is resisting the math in the morning and it's a workbook, they might say something that doesn't sound like curiosity, but it is. It's embedded. They might say something like, I don't know why I have to do this. Why? This seems so dumb. That's curiosity. That's actually not resistance. That's an opportunity for you to say, huh, yeah, it doesn't seem relevant. Okay, I want us to go down a path now. We aren't doing this until we figure out relevance. Fractions. I wonder, let's just spend a few days looking for where fractions show up in our lives, if they even do. And then we're going to pursue it that way. When I say looking for a mind at work, it means your child's mind, not your fantasy of what a mind asking a question looks like. It's the actual questions that your children bring to you. And you get to explain to your child how you're going to examine this new understanding of the topic. When we talk about critical thinking, we talk about making connections between subjects. Maybe your child is really set on setting up dominoes to knock them over, and they keep failing at one curve. You could actually start looking at that mathematically, like how close do they need to be together? How sharp can the turn be before it doesn't work anymore? This is a way that you can start to see a child's mind at work. One of the ways that I like to think about it is to foster curiosity. The first kind of curiosity is to look at what your child has interest in. So here's what we have happening here. My daughter, Katrin, is sewing a quilt. She showed a lot of interest in sewing when she was young. You can see she has headphones on. She's listening to the TV show Arthur in the background. That's DW back there. This doesn't look very schooly. But I can assure you, she got very good at sewing, which led her to an interest in fashion, which led her to an interest in women's history, which led her to reading about feminism and the feminine mystique by the age 13, I think. This was all part of a long journey that started in like third or fourth grade. When we lean into what our kids are interested in, and by the way, if you give them adult professional tools, sewing machines, buzz saws, KitchenAid mixers, anything like that, power drills, they're going to learn. That's why they want to be on your computer. It's the closest thing to a car that they get to drive at age 8. Give them real tools and see curiosity bloom. Another way that you grow curiosity is to live yours in front of your kids. I was in grad school at one point while my kids were being homeschooled, and I was studying Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the resistance to Hitler during World War II. And one of my kids got very interested in what I was learning. And so we started watching documentaries together. And that son eventually got interested in human rights and human rights law. And today he's a human rights lawyer. I don't know if the same trajectory would have happened if I hadn't lived my own interests visibly out loud in front of my kids. Both of these facilitate growth. This is part of what homeschooling looks like. Another way that we think critically is through recognizing that the typical testing system we have doesn't promote it. In a lot of schools, we have what I call multiple choice madness, and we'll do this quickly. If you were to look at this picture and read this question, which unit of length would you use to measure this? And then we look at the illustration. Would it be A, feet, B, centimeters, C, kilometers, or D, quarts? Most people are saying A. One of my friends who actually had this question on a test said centimeters. He got it marked wrong. He explained to his mother his logic. They went back to the school to explain it to the teacher, the principal, and the vice principal, the dean, and they decided to just disqualify the question. But here was his reasoning. It didn't say measuring a tree outside. It gave an illustration that was about 3 inches tall on the page. He said, I was using centimeters to measure the illustration. The teacher said, you should have known that I meant outside. He said, on what basis should I have known that? Critical thinking asks those kinds of difficult contextual questions. And one of the things that we get to do at home is not this, where we're trying to train our kids into just thinking what the teacher has in mind, rather than how they use their own minds. The second way that we promote learning at home is looking for a heart connected. Eye contact. I love how this mom is all the way down at the level of her child. A lot of times in school, teachers are looking over the heads of their students, right? Because they're up high and the kids are down low. But there is something about building relationship with the person who is leading your education that helps cement the learning. Not only that, eye contact helps you see whether the lights are going on or shutting off. Tone of voice. If your child starts wilting, seems a little bit nervous, is finding something frustrating, you will pick that up and modify, adapt the lesson to that child. Lastly, when you are participating with your child, you want to see where their natural investments are. I had one child who was just sold on all things animal related. So we learned everything using animals, the alphabet, the sounds, handwriting, reports, homonyms, everything I wanted this kid to learn, we did at the zoo. Like that was his natural investment point. That child today is an IT specialist. He doesn't care about animals that way anymore. It was a, IKEA tool that helped us assemble an education. One of the ways that we develop this heart investment is through what I call big, juicy conversations. We do these throughout the day. When your child is in the bathtub, when you're on a walk, when you're driving in the car to the dentist, we talk about what's interesting, not drill and kill. But, when we were reading Charlotte's Web, I was amazed that humans fell for the idea that a spider put this word in a web. They thought that was fine. They just thought the pig must be super. Like, how can that be? And then you just start talking about it. It's not like, okay, here's your comprehension worksheet. It's conversations that are open-ended that allow your kids to reveal the TikTok that's going on inside of them. And then the third way that we engage is looking for a body at play. We want our kids to move their bodies. I remember when my kids were learning how to spell or do times tables, we would go outside and throw a frisbee or a lacrosse ball or jump on the trampoline. Like, use your body when you're memorizing, because that makes a correlation. You can cuddle. That's, oh my gosh, so powerful. How many of you read aloud to your children with your kids in your lap or snuggled against you? Did you know you can do math that way? Did you know you could put a cat in the lap of a child who's struggling with handwriting and they'll handwrite better? We forget the power of coziness. One of my favorite tools for writing is the clipboard, because then a child can sit on a couch under a blanket with the dog next to them doing their writing. Cuddling, moving, and naturally practicing, right? If your child needs practice at whatever it is, handwriting or learning how to jump, whatever it is, using the body to learn, whether it's doing math through playing Monopoly or a board game instead of a worksheet, it's so powerful. I had one mom tell me that She always had her kids roller skate in the house while she read aloud to them. They must have had a big house. One of the things that we want to value in learning is something called relaxed alertness. And I want you to see these two pictures. On the right is my son Liam. He plays chess and he was very good at it in high school and ended up on a chess team. And by the time he was a senior, he was a first board chess player. He was obsessed. He used to read books about it. He played online. He looked for partners all the time. How many of you right now are thinking, how can I get my kid to play chess? Anyone thinking that? Is anyone thinking Julie is a really great mom? She must be really good at this home education thing. She got her son playing chess. Anyone thinking that? Okay, first of all, it was my kid's dad who introduced chess. But the very same student that you see here was also a huge gamer. And if you look in the other slide, other picture, you'll see my daughter playing Wii bowling. Both of them were deeply dedicated to games online, games offline, chess, video games, all of it. What they were learning was how to learn. We forget that learning is a thing, right? Learning is learning. So they can learn how to learn playing chess or Wii bowling. I'm not evaluating which one has more cultural cachet. We already know chess is a prestige subject. Wii bowling is not. But when we're talking about learning, this is what we want to see: relaxed alertness. This is the state that exists in a learner who feels competent and confident and is interested or intrinsically motivated. The best context to facilitate relaxed alertness is relationship, relationship, relationship. These are the canes, and they're incredible. They do all the good work on brain-based learning. What we're looking for then is a spirit invested. We are looking for a person's passion. One of my kids became passionate about constructed languages after his dad showed him that the original Canterbury Tales, written by Chaucer, had some body bits, right? Like if you decoded what the words meant, you'd get a little bit of that vaudevillian raunch of the old era. And he found that so fascinating, it led him to study Klingon, Esperanto, constructed languages. He had a linguistics major and finally taught himself computer programming. That's where his passion took him. The son that you see in this image, his passion took him to law school to become a human rights lawyer. Sometimes your kids need a cause. I have a daughter who became vegan because she was so disturbed by the way animals were being treated in the production of food for human beings. And a lot of times they need something I call a BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. A big, hairy, audacious goal is a Jim Collins term from business that he uses to help a whole team focus all their energies on a final idea. Sort of like when NASA decided, let's go to the moon, as opposed to let's explore space. So I loved that language. And I said to my son, Jacob, what would be a big, hairy, audacious goal you have? And of course, he gave me one I didn't want to do. He said, I want to go to space camp. It was $850. We did not have the money. I patted him on the head and said, sorry, we can't do that. His dad said, why can't he just earn the money? I said, because he's 11. And his dad said, I think people in the neighborhood would love to have freshly made, warm chocolate chip cookies delivered to them every Sunday night. Jacob could take orders and earn the money that way. And I thought, oh, sure, that'll last 3 trips around the neighborhood and it will be over. But Jacob was undaunted, and he and his father with a clipboard went and took orders. 3 years later, he had enough money, he had regular clients, and he went to space camp. Do you know what he discovered? He did not want to be an astronaut. That was money well spent, and it was money he earned because we collaborated with his dream. Eventually, he got interested in doing human rights at the UN. And because he had this background, this experience of making a dream come true, he was all about earning the scholarship money, finding the resources, applying for the positions. because he had already done it. He already knew it was possible. Now, just to be clear, not all 5 of my kids decided to get scholarships and do things. This was unique to this child. This is why we have to collaborate with their dreams. We can't dream on their behalf. My daughter Johanna's dream was to be able to participate in a Pride and Prejudice style ball. So I helped her. We found a vintage dance company in Cincinnati. She and her brother took dance lessons with other adults, and they got to borrow the costumes to participate. This one had no actual value to their future careers. It was just a very rich and deepening experience of learning. I also like to talk about celebrating learning with parties because kids love parties. Remember, we're educating children, not adults. And so, one of the parties that I recommend is when you have a prestige subject like poetry, you pair it with a tea time. You end up with light, color, whimsy, intimacy, coziness, connection, and of course, food, right? A little bit of tea, a beautiful place setting, a few candles, reading poems aloud. Suddenly, poetry is interesting. These are the kinds of experiences you can have when you homeschool. We're not just here to enforce poetry, to get people to read it against their will. We're here to be the match.com of learning. You want to create a good profile for that subject. You want to make sure that the picture is the right lighting. You want to make sure that that first introduction goes well. Here are some of the learning parties that we did in my family. We did one that was a gold rush party, one that was a Middle Ages Renaissance party, and the last was one that my daughter did with her best friend when we were studying Japan. They created that all on their own. Yes, our only job is to be a matchmaker. It's up to them whether they want to date it or not. Lastly, another way that we catalyze learning as home educators is we can get out of the house and into the world. We took our family on a trip of a lifetime to Italy. It took us years and years to save the money, and I had relatives there, so that helped. But it was awesome. We even met Andrea Bocelli in the Paris airport. We flew on the same plane with him. We sometimes went to the art museum in our town and got to know the paintings here in Cincinnati. And we often just went outside no matter what the weather was, because that also opens the mind, the heart, the passions, and the spirit. So this is how we bring education home. We open our minds, hearts, bodies, and spirit. We foster curiosity. We coordinate with our children's interests. We collaborate with their dreams. We celebrate with parties. We think critically. And finally, we get out of the house into the big world. So let me just say this. Nowhere in this list have I said that the goal is to make sure your child is well enough equipped to enter school in the fall. In other words, our job as home educators is not to bring school into the home or even to keep school going at home in case we have to fall back on school at another point in time. We're talking about a completely different mindset for what it means to bring learning to children. And Brave Writer in particular is so focused on training you as an educator, not just handing you curriculum and telling you to supervise unwilling children. If that's what you're doing, no wonder you feel struggling and strained, because it's really, really hard to get kids to do what they don't want to do. So how does all this sound to you? Sounds energy intensive, but I don't know if I can do it. Working on the mindset, appealing but nerve-wracking. Oh my goodness, I love this so much. So yes, let me say one thing to start with. It does involve you. But you know what's interesting? When energy is that good, productive energy, it feels good. Like for the parents who say it isn't fun to homeschool, it's because they're at cross purposes on some level with their kids. Like, what energy would you rather do? Prepare a great table of art supplies to do a really fun art project, or coerce your kids into doing an art project they don't want to do, right? Like we're looking for energy because energy is what fuels learning. So what are any of these worries yours? What about socialization? I hear this all the time. One of the most beautiful aspects of homeschooling is that if you are in a community or even in your own family, socialization is learned through interaction. And a lot of school is not about that. You are in a classroom with kids and you're learning how to behave in a classroom with other kids, but that is not the same as a free exchange of ideas or being curious about someone that is not an age mate. I have noticed after being around homeschoolers since 1984 that to a kid, they're comfortable with adults. I know kids from school. That is not always the case. Homeschoolers have a range of ages that they feel comfortable expressing themselves to because their socialization has not been about how to behave in a school. It's about how to behave in relationships. Some people are worried that their kids aren't at grade level. But here's the other beautiful thing. Because education is tailor-made, you might have a child who's actually ahead in math, quote unquote ahead, struggling a bit with reading, right on the money for writing, and super deep diving into history, no interest in science. Hello, isn't that like most of us? But homeschooling accommodates that. It adapts to that so your child doesn't have to feel behind or bored because they're ahead. You get to create an environment that is suited to the kind of learner they are in each of the school subjects. What if I'm not good at a particular subject? Well, I was terrible at math, but you know what I found out? In my 30s, I was really good at 5th grade math. Who knew? If I can learn math well enough to teach it through 8th grade, you definitely can. We forget that we have maturity on our sides. Our brains have clicked over. You can learn anything from kindergarten through 8th grade well enough to teach those kids. And if there's an area where you struggle, you can triangle in help. That is absolutely how everyone does it. How do I make my child do their schoolwork when all they want to do is play video games? Well, fortunately for us, we actually have a companion here on the journey. Ash Brandon on Instagram has a new book coming out in August that I just reviewed. There is a way to create the architecture of a family that includes the joy of video games, but that isn't run by it. And basically what it is you structure that play the same way you structure, well, this is the day of the week that we clean the bathrooms. You figure out the amount that works for your family, and then we work on school trying to engage their interest, not focusing on just cranking through a bunch of workbooks. And then finally, what is the right method and how will I know I have found it? Psst. You never find it. Every year is different. Every year, because your kids get older and you've never been at that stage before. But what you will find is more and more confidence that you know learning when you see it. It's okay to fail. It's okay to take risks. It's okay to change gears. That's part of your journey. In fact, this book, The Brave Learner, is a great place to start to kind of situate your thinking. A lot of this generation jumps into curriculum without kind of a worldview of what learning is. So I highly recommend my book. There are others that are really good too, but you know, you're at my webinar. This will help you encapsulate what the vision can be. But really, to make a decision to homeschool, you have to ask yourself why you want to do it. Why would I dedicate 24/7 to my kids' education? Why would I do that? Why would you choose to spend all this time with your children when someone down the street at a school could just take them off your hands for a little while, right? How many of you are asking that question even right now? For most of us, we have a dream that we'll have these self-starting learners and we'll just get to hook up with them and sustain them. But the facts are, self-starting learning starts with you. Despite all the challenges today's homeschoolers face, the one magic wand gift I would fairy godmother give you is courage. I would love you to have a little moxie, a little, I love my kids the most. I can learn to do this well. And it takes some learning. Part of the joy of homeschooling is that you get a second chance at a brilliant education. Suddenly, fractions will be fascinating and pill bugs endlessly delightful. You'll learn about phonics and physics too. If you delegate the adventure of homeschooling to some other entity, like some co-op or hybrid school, or your mother-in-law or the school down the street, you don't get to have that experience. You're simply choosing another version of school in a building. The opportunity to ditch the lesson plan and visit the art museum just because will be gone. Homeschooling lets you, the parent, be there when the lights go on. And I believe in you. You really can homeschool. All it takes is this, and you might want to screenshot this, is a commitment to be as eager to learn about homeschooling as you want your child to be eager to learn to read, write, and calculate math facts. We're always saying, I want my child to be a learner. Be one. Model it. Be as interested in understanding the psychology of learning and your children as you want your children to be in your homeschool. And you will have a rich life of learning together, I promise. You can do that best when you are cut loose from the expectations of other school systems. If you have this vision, but you are constantly trying to do the homework that someone else is giving you, you will end up, in my opinion, not always, but many times, in the worst of both worlds, because you're trying to hold on to this cozy homeschool vision of learning, but you're not confident enough to own it. So you've delegated the authority, and now you're trying to live up to their vision, but it's not really working with your kids. I want you to be your own curriculum director, your own instructor, your own principal, school nurse, PE teacher, whatever. I did jokingly say, have your partner take on the janitorial duties because you deserve that. That was a joke in our family that my kid's dad was the janitor and he thought that was great. And it was very helpful. So are you ready? Because we can help. I know it's hard to do this alone. It's the hardest. So what we've done is we've created what we call the Brave Writer Training Program. And here's what we do in this program. You're hearing all this information. It's creating a fantasy. The fantasy won't match your reality. You will get stuck. You will wonder if you're doing something wrong. And what we do is every month, we offer you readings on a weekly basis or podcasts or something to listen to encourage you. We find the things that you need. We do one webinar where Dawn, my brilliant Dawn Smith, and I model the practices, discuss how to implement our program and how that spreads to the other subjects in your homeschool. And then once a month, Dawn meets in a general office hours for all the questions you have about homeschooling and Brave Writer. And then a second one dedicated to high school for parents of teens, because we know you have unique needs, right? And then we have a community with a chat board where you can actually post questions, share with each other, get to know each other, and cheer each other on. Weirdly, it's $20 for the entire fall semester. So from August all the way to December. It's not $20 a month, it's $20. So what is that, like $5 a month? Dawn, you want to do the math? Who's good at math? Yes, so bravewriter.com train, but we will raise the price to $30 in July, just so you know. So this is very inexpensive. Why is it cheap? Because we want you to be successful with our program. And we know that you want support and community. Here's what's different about your generation than mine. Mine did not have the internet at the beginning, and we were an unknown quantity. So we were defining homeschool as we went. Remember how I started this talk? You are caught in the middle of so many competing visions. And as a result, there's a sort of paralysis that sets in. You're like, I don't know if I'm doing the one I'm in right, and this one looks really good, but maybe I should try that one, and I'll try a bit of this. Commit to one. Commit to Brave Learning. Commit to Brave Writer, and we will walk you through it at any hour of the day. We're a lifeline. You can write and say, What is the illustration on page 12 of Growing Brave Writers? I don't understand it. We will help you. We have a team of people who respond. Someone said she did this from January to April and it was so good. Definitely signing up again. Yes, and it's cheap because you know what? This is what we want for you. It's not about making money, it's about having a successful homeschool. All right, so I have 3 books that would make great summer reading for you. Here's what I want to challenge you to do. Be a learner. Break through your own discomfort with finishing a book. Tell yourself that your kids matter so much, you will read these books and you will come into this year with a completely different way of thinking. Now, for some of you, reading 3 books in a summer, you'll do it. For some of you, you'll read 1 book a year. I don't care. Take as long as you need to. But my only requirement when you buy one of my books is finish it, because I make my most compelling case right at the end. I have crescendos built into all 3 of my nonfiction books. I want you to get there. And then you'll have the breakthrough insight. Okay? Yes, and I read them on audiobook. That's right. That's another way to do it. Very much. Okay? So you can go to my brand new author website. I only got one this year. Isn't that hilarious? Took me that long. All right. So thank you for coming live. Those of you who did, thank you for watching the replay if that's how you are here today. This has been an absolute thrill and joy. I hope that you have a vision now for what it might be like to facilitate learning, not just implementing a program or a curriculum, but how to actually create an environment that might make your kids want to learn.